Hello, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. The meeting will start with a greeting from the Mayor of Greenfield.
I think that was my cue to come on and welcome everyone. Due to circumstances completely beyond my control, I'm not able to be there with you tonight, and I regret that a great deal. I'm excited about this Main Street redesign. It is intended to enhance downtown Greenfield in many ways. It's part of the total picture of our downtown revitalization. The good news is, and I want to welcome Fuss and O'Neill tonight because they'll be doing their presentation where you will be able to learn more about something that you've been hearing a lot about off and on for the last couple of years. They're ready tonight to give you the information that I think we've all been waiting to hear. So Fuss and O'Neill is working on behalf of the city and Mass DOT. This project is fully funded with Mass DOT. The city had to put in a couple of $100,000 to get us to the design stage, the design and engineering stage. The rest of it, which is a multi-million-dollar project, will be funded by Mass DOT. It will make Greenfield and make downtown Greenfield a multimodal community. By that I mean you can be on bicycles, you can be on e-bikes, you can be a pedestrian, you can be a vehicle driver. This will enhance the experience for each and every one of you. And it is done with a full emphasis on safety for pedestrians, including those with disabilities. A lot of our intersections will be redesigned to be better able to handle people with disabilities, our cyclists, and those of us who drive in town. So I'm anxious to see this presentation, and I won't keep us any longer. And thanks again for coming out this evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We're thrilled with the turnout. My name's Arnold Robinson. I'm a planner and urban designer with Fuss and O'Neill, which is the multidisciplinary firm that's working with the city of Greenfield on this project. And mainly tonight, I'm serving as a facilitator. I'm helping to sort of organize the process by which we get to hear you tonight, which is what the key part of this project is all about. So you go down one slide, or after you get the presentation rolling. So a couple of things for tonight. We're at the beginning of this project. We're at the start of the design phase and sort of looking at things. We've done some existing conditions analysis, which we'll be sharing with you tonight. But this is a workshop session where we want to hear from you. And so the way that tonight's going to lay out is going to be, can you make it to the slide 2, even if it's not full screen? Isn't technology grand? Yeah, there we go. All right. So we've got a lineup tonight where we're going to show you the information that we've been gathering on existing conditions, on the programs that the mayor mentioned that's funding the project. And then most of our time together is going to be focused on getting your input. And we're going to do that in a way with design stations, which is that we will have, you'll see scattered around the room, these 3 different tables in which we're going to be able to sit and have conversations with folks about the things that you care the most about on topics. Next slide. There you go. So the project is at a stage that Erin Keegan, our project manager, is going to share with you where we haven't put pen to paper yet. We are looking at what are the key existing conditions elements that are happening out there on Main Street. And then we're tonight identifying what are the key community goals for how a future Main Street functions and how it works. So there'll be 3 stations that we'll divide you into, and you're going to hear the presentation along these same 3 themes. And the themes are going to be how do vehicles and vehicular traffic move on Main Street? And there'll be a station over here that will deal with vehicular issues. Parking is included in that discussion as well. At the back corner will be a discussion of bikes and bike infrastructure. And I can also think about that as sort of any wheeled mobility. I don't want it to be only bikes, but wheeled mobility and how that moves through. And then at the far back station will be pedestrians and how pedestrians move through the project area. And so our presentation tonight is going to follow those same themes. We recognize that those things are interrelated, but we also want to be able to tease apart your key goals, your key concerns into those three buckets, if you will. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin Keegan, who's going to lead members of our team who are going to present the project summary. They're going to present some of our existing conditions findings as we look out there and understand things, and share some best practices that other communities are doing before we head into the input section of tonight. So Erin.
Thank you, Arnold. Good evening. My name is Aaron Keegan. I'm a project manager with Fuston O'Neill. Tonight, also from Fuston O'Neill, we have with us some of my colleagues, including Connor Agro, Chelsea Zakis, and Ben Anderson will be presenting to you tonight this evening. Okay, so let's start out with what area are we talking about? What are the project limits? This particular project, of course, is on Main Street. We're starting 100 feet east of Coleraine Street, and we're continuing 0.7 miles to the High Street intersection. That's the project extent. And as far as the cross streets go, it's about 50 feet to the sides of Main Street to get to each cross street. So it's a really linear project that we're talking about. The project that we're going to be discussing is really what's happening between the curbs for the most part. We will also be talking about fixing sidewalks and wheelchair ramps where they're deficient or not accessible. But primarily, this is a presentation about the transportation design of Main Street that's happening in between the curbs. Well, we're going to have questions, and we're going to take your comments after the presentation. If, do you have a quick question? I can. Sure. What you said about the side streets and 50 feet. Sure. Okay, so the project is primarily along Main Street, but of course there's 14 intersections between Coleraine Street and High Street. So the project isn't going to go very far down any of those side streets, only about 50 feet. So it's going to take care of the intersections, but not extend too far down the streets that are north and south to Main Street. Sure. Okay, so let's start with the project summary. What is the project purpose and need? This is something we had to explain to MassDOT when we initiated the project with the city. So I've got six points. The first one is we want to rehabilitate Main Street into a complete street. And we'll delve more into what a complete street means in just a moment. The project will address, most importantly to MassDOT and of course to the city of Greenfield, is safety. Also, we want to bring infrastructure into a good state of repair. That's the pavement and sidewalks. We want to make it new. We also want to make sure Main Street is usable for all modes of travel. That's walking, cycling, vehicle drivers, and transit users. We also want to, in general, we want to enhance the experience of Main Street, and we want to make Main Street nice to complement potential future development. The last point here is that the city has the option with this project to repair or replace, upgrade underground utilities that are under Main Street. And the idea is that if Main Street is under construction for transportation purposes, that's an opportunity to also address some subsurface utilities like water mains, etc., at the city's option. So what are complete streets? I'm going to give a definition here from MassDOT. And it reads, a complete street is one that provides safe and accessible options for all travel modes, walking, biking, transit, and motorized vehicles, for people of all ages and abilities. Designing streets with these principles contributes towards safety, health, economic viability, and quality of life in a community. And as you know, Greenfield, this isn't the first time that has planned for complete streets. Go ahead, next slide. In 2014, there was a sustainability plan where complete streets was very much part of what was discussed. Also, in 2017, Greenfield initiated and completed a complete streets prioritization plan where Main Street was specifically mapped and named as an important link in a citywide complete streets network. So this is an ongoing part of planning for complete streets in Greenfield. And I just want to differentiate a little bit, tonight's in presentation, tonight we'll be talking about the redesign of Main Street. There are two other simultaneous studies going on right now in Greenfield. There's a lot going on. Greenfield is also conducting a deliberate downtown initiative update to the city's downtown revitalization plan. The last meeting for that was, I believe, January 19th. And there's also a downtown parking study happening right now. The last meeting was, I believe, January 31st. So, of course, these topics are related to the project we'll be talking about tonight, but they are separate design contracts, or study contracts, I should say. And we'll be learning from the results of the other two studies that are happening simultaneously. But tonight we'll be focusing just on the transportation design of Main Street itself. Okay, project funding. So the mayor mentioned some of this already. I just want to underscore that there was about $289,000 appropriated for this project for the design and engineering. The construction cost is estimated right now at about $7.8 million, and that would be paid for by a combination of state and federal funds. The project is planned to be included in what MassDOT calls their Transportation Improvement Program. Right now, construction is at the earliest projected to happen at the end of 2026, if all goes well. And the city, as I mentioned, is considering additional utility upgrades. That would be the engineering design for additional utility upgrades would be paid for by a community development block grant at the city's option. So just a little bit about project funding. I want to talk about project schedule. We're, of course, here tonight at the first public workshop. The next step in this process will be that our team will take your opinions and statements, and we will fold that into the design work that we're doing and develop 10% concepts. Then we will present those 10% concepts back to you at a second public workshop. That's scheduled to take place approximately June of this year. And then after that second meeting, where the public has had a chance to see the alternatives and comment on the actual 10% design, we'll have we'll then delve into our 25% design process for MassDOT. And our contract currently ends when we submit the 25% design plans to MassDOT, currently scheduled for the fall of this year. Okay, now I'm going to get into existing conditions and key issues. I'll try to go quickly. I know many of you are familiar with Main Street, but we're going to talk about key issues in three topics: vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians. So let's start with vehicles, I believe. Okay, so first and foremost, existing conditions. There is a safety issue on Main Street. We found that of the 14 intersections in our project area on Main Street, 9 of those intersections have a higher than average crash rate compared to the state average for unsignalized intersections, with, of course, the exception of Federal Street and Main Street. So it's over half the intersections in the project area have a higher than average crash rate. Vehicle speed, we did notice that there is a speeding condition towards the east end of the project near Franklin Street and High Street. As you know, most of Main Street in this project area is 25 miles per hour. As you move east towards Franklin Street and High Street, it lowers to 20 miles per hour. And we had speed observations collected, and we're seeing about 7 miles per hour over the speed limit, Franklin Street and east, which was a bit of a concern. I want to introduce the concept of what MassDOT calls crash clusters. And these are statistical areas where there's a high incidence of crashes, and MassDOT actually publishes these to inform cities to take action and think about making things safer. And it turns out that there is a pretty big one in the middle of our project area. This is statistics from 2010 to 2019. We have a top 5% pedestrian and bike crash cluster for Franklin County. And when I say a pedestrian and bike crash cluster, that means that vehicles have struck pedestrians and bicyclists. So this is one of the reasons why MassDOT is eager to help bring this project off the ground. Their primary concern is safety, and when they see a cluster like this, they're eager to help a design project rehabilitate the facility. Now, I want to mention another existing conditions issue. I know it's a hot button issue in town. I want to underscore something Arnold said earlier, which is that we're here tonight to listen to the public. We haven't designed the project yet, but we do want to talk about the issue of angled parking. And I just want to bring up two downsides of angled parking. The first one is that drivers have difficulty seeing bicyclists behind them when they're parked angled towards the curb. The second is that when you angle parking, you need more road width to fit the cars. So you're allocating more space to vehicles when you park at an angle in the roadway. And as you know, this is a street that likely can't be widened, so space is very important in between the curbs. So that's an existing condition. Bike safety, of course, as we saw the crash cluster, we know that we have an existing safety condition, a bike safety condition, namely cyclists being struck by vehicles. The second one is a little more bicycle comfort. So the picture shows a cyclist using Main Street. There are no striped bike lanes on Main Street, as you know. And it makes an uncomfortable environment for cyclists to use Main Street. I would even say Main Street's a little bit intimidating if you're not an experienced cyclist to ride your bike on. So this project is going to try to address that issue and make Main Street more comfortable for bicyclists, in particular, people just starting out, maybe less experienced cyclists. And by the way, that's something that MassDOT really emphasizes in their the guidelines, and it's something that they want to see when they review designs and when they fund projects. So that's another reason why we're making a point of this tonight. And existing conditions, we want to make Main Street a nice link with regional bike routes. Currently, with no bike accommodations on Main Street, it's sort of a missing link in the regional network of bike routes. I'll make this point really quickly. The existing cross-section of Main Street, so you have the angled parking, 2 vehicular lanes, and no bike lanes currently, it's now obsolete as far as MassDOT is concerned as a road design. So unfortunately, to put the exact same design back the way it is with this project would probably not be accepted as a design alternative to MassDOT if they're funding the project. Okay, next, I just want to hit on a few existing conditions for pedestrians. As we saw there with the crash cluster, including pedestrians, we have a safety issue existing on Main Street. That safety issue is related to visibility, most likely. We want to make sure that sidewalks and sidewalk ramps are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We haven't done a formal accounting of ramps and sidewalks, but I want to say it's probably 50-50. About half the ramps you'll see in the project area are okay, and half are not compliant with standards for accessibility at the moment. And with pedestrian existing conditions, we want to make sure that there's clear connections for people who want to park off of Main Street and walk. Okay, project goals. These are connected project goals, again in 3 areas: vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians. We'll talk about those in more detail. Go ahead. Next slide. Okay, so when I talk about the goals, we haven't designed the project yet. We're waiting to hear public input, but we do have goals, and these come from what MassDOT is encouraging us to envision. And so we'll start with vehicle goals. We want to create safer intersections, and we want to calm vehicle traffic and speeds. We want to optimize on-street parking for the safety of all modes. We want to share, we want to make parking available. We want to share road space with bicyclists as well. And we want to ensure safe guidance for vehicle drivers to understand where they can easily park off of Main Street. That's typically done through clear guide signage. Project goals for cyclists. We want to create required safe bicycle accommodations, and when I say required, I'm talking about the MassDOT design requirements. For a road of over 10,000 vehicles per day, it is required to accommodate bicycles per MassDOT standard. We want to make biking more comfortable, and we want to connect Main Street to other citywide bike routes. And lastly, project goals, aspirations for pedestrians. We want to ensure that accessibility of sidewalks and ramps is totally compliant in the project area. We want to improve crossing visibility, of course, and we want to create transit shelters. There's currently a lack of transit shelters on Main Street. We want to make sure that people using the bus have a shelter and an accessible way to get to that shelter. And lastly, we want to make sure that people who park off Main Street have a safe path to walk. All right, just a few more slides. Thank you for hanging with me here. We want to get into best practices. And again, I just want to emphasize that we haven't designed yet, and these are best practices that we've seen in other projects. we're still open to other suggestions, but we're just going to run through a few examples that we'd like to share with you. First is best practices for vehicle calming and safety. So this is a project recently completed in Northampton on King Street. You can see there's clear pavement markings for bicycles, pedestrians, and vehicles. The lanes have been right-sized to still allow trucks, but they're no wider than they need to be to share space with bicycles. And you can see there's a curb bump out in this picture. And I know that in Street and in Greenfield, you are familiar with what a curb bump out is. You have some already. But this is an important element in the design to narrow the road a little bit, because what we've noticed is when roads are wide, people tend to speed. Okay, so safe intersection markings. Again, I just want to point out that we have a green bike lane that goes through the intersection. It tells both the bicyclist and the drivers how the bikes actually are getting through the intersection, and it just makes the space more clear and visible. I want to get into the issue of on-street parking. I want to show two alternatives. We have the first one. This is parallel parking, where the vehicle is against the curb, and providing a bike lane next to the parked vehicles with what we call a buffer area. It's a striped space next to the bike lane. This is just one alternative in areas where it may not be possible to do it another way, but it's sort of a medium comfortable option, and what it provides is something better than what exists now. It's a bike lane with a little bit of protection from traffic. Some buffered bike lanes also have a space between the bike lane and parked vehicles. That's a little extra protection for doors opening. So there you have it. That's a buffered bike lane. Okay, this is another configuration. This is actually MassDOT's preferred configuration for a road with over 10,000 vehicles. And again, we haven't designed it yet, but we want to make sure that you're seeing the latest and greatest. This is a bike lane against the curb. These are frequently being built all over the Boston area and other parts of the Commonwealth. And you have a bike lane against the curb, a 2 to 3 foot space, and then you have the parking parallel next to the travel lane. It's a little different, and it takes some getting used to, but this provides the highest level of comfort and safety for the bicyclists. So, an example for you to consider. Last best practices regarding vehicles, I believe. This is regarding parking, of course. We already mentioned guide signage, and that's primarily the best practice to inform drivers of how to safely and quickly get to parking off Main Street. There are other ways to do it besides signage. Going on a small tangent, there are apps now where cities will actually have an app that will guide people to available parking just off Main Street. I'm not saying that necessarily will be part of this project, but in addition to signs, there are other technology that can be used to improve the parking experience off the Main Street. And this is my last slide, I believe. Next one is just showing an example of a best practice for a transit shelter. Today's best practice transit shelters accommodate all three of buses, bikes, and pedestrians. The picture here is just one way to do it, but it's something that we think would be a big upgrade to Main Street. And that's my last slide. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague now, Connor Agro. He is a project engineer and will be working on this project. Connor.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to talk a little bit about some best practices that are bicycle specific. So when we start looking at implementing bike design and bike improvements into a project, there really are like a ton of different options. And the main things we want to focus on when we choose what's best for that project is we want to maximize safety and we want to maximize cyclist comfort level, because we acknowledge that not everyone is a advanced cyclist or an expert biker. So we really want to implement a design that everyone can use and feel comfortable and safe using. So if you look at this diagram on the screen, it kind of shows a wide range of alternatives that could be considered. So on the left, you have some less comfortable, considered less safe options. Those are like a shared vehicle and bike lane or a shared bus and bike lane. So those don't really like eliminate any conflicts between a vehicle and a bicycle, but they do still provide some signage and markings to emphasize that a bike could be present on that street. If you look towards the middle of that diagram, you can see a more conventional striped bike lane. That could just be a shoulder stripe as a bike lane, or a buffered bike lane, as Aaron discussed. These are definitely safer than the shared options. There still are some safety concerns, such as a parked car like opening their side door and hitting a bicycle. On the right are what are considered the most comfortable and safest options. So these are separated bike lanes, and they kind of take a buffered bike lane to the next level of safety, and they provide a vertical element of separation. So that could be a vertical flexible post, maybe a raised island separating the bike lane and the vehicle lane, or even on the picture on the right, the bike lane is raised to the sidewalk level, so the bikes are separated by the curb from vehicles. And the separated bike lanes are safer for bikes and pedestrians, but they're also safer for vehicles, because when those facilities exist, drivers know where to expect the bicycles, so they're not worried about conflicting with them in their vehicle lanes. And Aaron mentioned this already, but separated or buffered bike lanes are required by Mass DOT for their design approval, and because they're funding the construction, those would be required. And that is based on the traffic volumes expected on Main Street. So we did do some data collection and found out that there are more than 10,000 vehicles per day on Main Street, which is the threshold set by Mass DOT. There has been significant safety research showing that separated and protected bike lanes lead to fewer fatalities and just overall better road safety. And like I said, that's not just for cyclists, that's also for drivers and pedestrians. So the goal of improving bike infrastructure is really part of a bigger city vision. In 2017, the city of Greenfield completed their Complete Streets Prioritization Plan. And this identified and recommended improvements throughout the city, but specifically on Main Street in the context of creating a citywide bike network, and creating these connections will improve regional connection to regional bikeways and also improve economic development. So that's all I had. I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea Zakis, who is our planner.
Hello, everybody. So keeping in with best practices and examples from local neighboring communities, when we consider design for pedestrians, we are thinking first and foremost about visibility, and that is making the person visible to drivers. That can be done in many ways. This is an example from Pittsfield. Several visibility measures going on here. We've got signage that is pointing down to the crosswalk. It's bright, it's reflective, it's telling a driver there is a pedestrian here, this is a crosswalk, be on the lookout. And then also, mentioned before, the curb bump outs. Right in front of the parking spot in the lower left, you'll see the curb line dips out. It's called a bump out. What this does for pedestrians is it brings the pedestrian out from behind a parked car and into visibility of the driver. It also creates a shorter distance of travel from one side to the other, which is shorter distance, less time to be exposed to vehicular traffic. Next, please. More on visibility. This is, again, example from Pittsfield. We have got this crosswalk in the foreground that is bright red. It's bound by thick white lines, very bold, and it is also a different texture from the rest of the road surface. This really stands out to oncoming traffic vehicles. They see it. That makes it very clear that this is a crosswalk. Be on the lookout for a person. And then in the center, this is a median pedestrian refuge or pedestrian island. And this is great for wide roads or multi-lane roads. And what this does for the pedestrian is it gives the pedestrian time to focus on where they're walking, looking to traffic coming from the one direction first, stop in the middle, and then they get to look at traffic coming from the other way instead of left, right. They get to focus on one at a time, which is a safer situation. And then also, similar to the curb cutout, it is going to shorten the distance, shorten the time that a person is crossing, and that's less exposure to the vehicle. Then we have two examples here of pedestrian beacons, the flashing lights. Pedestrian beacons are added safety measures where a painted crossing and or signage might not be adequate alone. The pedestrian flashing beacon, both of these examples, they're activated by a button, and it makes the driver more aware. It enhances awareness that a pedestrian is present right now at this crossing. Then another best practice is related to connectivity. Creating network connections between destinations for pedestrians. So rather than having some pedestrian connectivity over here and here, creating a seamless network between destinations for pedestrians to get to and from. And then noted again that the city did call out Main Street for pedestrian connectivity in the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan back in 2017. And continuing with pedestrian connectivity, I wanted to highlight, again, we've talked a little bit about various parking areas in and around Main Street, and I really like to use the concept of park once, rather than driving your car down to Main Street, parking on one end, running your errand there, and driving to the other end to park for your next errand. Park once is you get to do multiple things while having your car in one stationary space the whole time. And that is done by creating a network and connectivity, creating a safe, vibrant, enjoyable space to walk around and to do those errands by foot if possible. And using accessible ramps and sidewalks, using signage to guide you about, really just creating that larger network and connection. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Arnold, who's going to talk about our next steps.
All that stands between us and chaos of getting to express all opinions and getting to really go to work at the tables. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. And I'm going to give you sort of the instructions for working at the station. Now, you won't have to remember all of this. You'll have people at each of the stations who are going to be there to work with you and talk with you. But I want to lay out some guidelines for how we work together at those stations, how we capture ideas efficiently. And so here's some of those things. As we mentioned, the three topic areas, if you have a particular thing that you really want to go to and focus on first, you can go to that. You can spend your time evenly at the stations, or if you're just a one person, you can just go to that. So vehicular is going to be over on that side. All the stations, by the way, are labeled with those signs above the top. Bicycle is back in the corner on the angle, and pedestrians is back in that corner by the lovely AV station. And so that's where you're going to want to go to talk about those topics and to engage with our staff. So there's a couple of ways to do that. And the first is, if there are parts of this presentation or parts of the project scope or anything that you have questions about, those staff at the table can answer those questions to the best of their ability. They can tell you what they know about the project, and particularly about that sector of improvement for those particular audiences. There's another way to do it too, though. If you have a particular recommendation already in mind because you work there, you own a business there, and you have a particular thing, you know this area the best. And we want to capture those ideas. So our tool for doing that, our best friend tonight, is going to be the Post-it and the marker. So what we do is we certainly want you to talk to the staff and ask questions and articulate things. But in the end, if you have a suggestion for something that should get done or something that you don't want to see done, this is the way to express it. This is the way we capture it. We won't remember everything in our ears as staff, but we will remember it if you write it down. So at each station, and I'm going to use the vehicular one right up there on that right-hand side, there are 2 blank pieces of paper. And at each station, they have the same thing. And we phrase the questions this way that we'd love you to give us your feedback. And the first is, what is a positive thing that is out there in Main Street that you want to retain and enhance? So it could be street trees, it could be a particular section of sidewalk that's the right width, whatever. And that's the first phrase, is what is positive that should be retained? We don't want to start with the assumption that everything is faulty and needs to be replaced, right? We want to hear what you value. But the second question is, what's a negative that should be improved or changed? And so if there's a crossing distance across Main Street at a particular block that is too long or it's not well signaled, that's what we want to hear about. We want you to say that the crossing at Chapman Street is too wide and you can't make it across safely, or the sight lines are bad. And we're happy if you just list the negative. If you just say that that particular crossing is too wide, that's okay. But if you've got an idea for solving it, we want to hear that too, if you have it. But that's part of our job too, is to come up with solutions. But we want to capture those ideas. The other thing is, we show you these best practices, not because we have a thought as to what the design's going to be, but we want to get you thinking tonight about things that you react to and say, that would be great to have on Main Street in Greenfield, or never in my town. I don't want to see that. We show you those to get the discussion going. And so feel free to write those things down too, that you reacted against positively or negative. We want to capture those ideas as well. One thing that will happen is that as you go to a station, the first person may write something down, and I'm going to use a silly example of sidewalks being purple, right? Because hopefully no one's going to say that. So sidewalks are going to be purple. If you see that idea up on the board already, you are certainly welcome to write another Post-it that says sidewalks are purple. But if you don't want to waste your time on that and you just like the idea, you can put a check mark on that Post-it that says, I second that. That's a great idea. Let's do that. So either way is okay with us, but we want to make sure that we not only capture each individual idea, but a sense of your priority. If I get 40 people who say purple sidewalks, then that's part of the project probably. So that's just an example of what goes on. The other thing I'd urge you to do, and this is going to happen at some of the stations, is that you're going to write down purple sidewalks, and the person next to you is going to write never purple sidewalks. Please don't start fighting tonight. We're going to be looking at all design alternatives. It's early in the project. You don't need to put that into it. Have your idea heard, put it up on the board, move to the next thing. Okay, it's not the debate time yet about alternative designs. So we want to capture all the ideas. The other thing I'd ask you to do, please don't power post-it. Don't put up 5 of the same Post-it, or on your own check thing, put 5 check marks. It doesn't give us an accurate read of the room, okay? So no power posting. So the other thing, if you've done these kind of design workshops or charrettes, it's gonna be a little chaotic. It's gonna be a little loud. The one thing I'd urge you to do is be patient. We have an hour, a little less than an hour and a half to work together. You're gonna be able to spread out to 3 stations and talk to us. If it's a little busy at one station, rotate over to another. Wait your turn. But the other thing is, for someone who does make it to the station first, please ask your questions, express your ideas, and then make room for other folks to get there. Right? So don't just be the only person at the station talking to the staff person. We want to hear you, but we also want everybody to have a chance to be heard tonight. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be the floater. So Aaron is going to be working up here at the vehicular table. Connor and Ben at some points will be at the bicycle table. Chelsea's going to be back at the pedestrian table. I'll be a floater. If you've got questions that don't seem to fit neatly into one of these things, or you want to figure out where to go, come find me. I'm happy to sort of answer the bigger questions, capture random ideas. The one thing we would ask is that, certainly if you've got ideas that are related to Main Street, but as Aaron said, might not be curb to curb, We want to capture those ideas, but we also don't want to burn the evening on them. So I never want to say that there's a bad idea. We want to capture those things, but we also don't want to hijack the evening for them. So I'm going to put up a board up here. I'm going to put an easel up, and it's just going to be called the bike rack, and it's the parking lot. And it's going to be, if you got another idea that's sort of related to downtown, but maybe not this project, it's a place to put those things up. So we'll be able to capture those ideas too. So you're going to have a lot of one-on-one time. So I just want to ask the room, any process questions about how we're going to do the tables? Is it clear how that's all going to work? You can find me. I'm going to put on my bright red hat. I think I'll be the only person in a red hat. So you'll be able to find me in the midst of the scrum of people as we go. So Fuss and O'Neill folks, I'm going to ask you guys to go to your stations and be ready so you don't have to fight.